Hi again, everybody. Today I'm gonna give you another example on some of my research. It's on doping this time as well. It's a relatively short paper, so hopefully this won't take too much of your time. This work is not my own work alone. It's co-authored with a colleague of mine, Andrea Petroxi, from UK, or actually originally Hungarian. I hope you like it. Let's start. Okay, as always, we start by finding the presentation itself. So we power up the browser and we search for, again, academia.edu and my name to find my academia.edu homepage, and click on the top here, and in a little bit of time hopefully it comes up. There we are. Okay, we move to conference presentations, and today we are going to talk about the second one here, the doping self-reporting game, with subtitle The Paradox of False Telling Mechanism and its Potential Research and Policy Implications. So let's just download the paper and put it up in full screen. Okay, there we are. As you can see, this is joint work by me as well as Andrea Petroxi. She is a professor at the Faculty of Science, Engineering and Computing at Kingston University in London, UK. I am at Molde, Norway, as it says below here. Okay, let's look at the outline. We start in point 1 here by looking at the questionnaires a little bit in general. And then at point 2 we will focus on doping and lying, or if you like, how dopers may find it convenient to answer various questionnaires related to their doping abuse or use. In point 3 we will briefly look into a very simple game model which kind of tries to illustrate our points. And finally, a few conclusions. Okay, let's start a little bit on questionnaires. I remember that many years ago that I actually gave a course in questionnaire design and use. I remember from those days that I was kind of already then very suspicious about most results that came out of questionnaires. Of course, the reason is that if you base research on questionnaires, you also base research on a lot of possible mistakes from the humans answering either your formal questionnaires or interviews or through web or whatever way you do it. Here are some points which may make questionnaire information gathering difficult. The first one is a very common one. It's referred to here as misinterpretation. And misinterpretation here can be something which is both on the respondent as well as the researcher's hand, so to speak. If I answer a questionnaire where I do not understand the question, of course, in that case either I don't answer it or I answer on another interpretation of the question, which is perhaps not what the researcher would like me to answer. Another common mistake is too long questionnaires. Here, symbolized by this phrase, respondent gives up. I am actually a member of something which in Norway is called Gallup panel, which means some kind of panel, a certain amount of people who are kind of picked to answer a whole enormous amount of questionnaires. So I answer questionnaires all the time, actually. And sometimes I try to be honest, sometimes I don't. That is a different story, which we will return to. But in most cases, the main reason why I don't fulfill these questionnaires is because they are far too long. So I give up, simply. I don't find time to finish them up. So this is an important point when you make questionnaires. Do not make them too long. A third classical mistake is lack of necessary answer categories. If you don't include, for instance, a don't know category, then you, in a sense, force respondents to answer on questions they really don't know the answer on, and that may provide a lot of misinformation. Sometimes the questions are simply too difficult. The amount of knowledge needed to answer them is really not present on the hand of the respondent. In that case, of course, again, if you don't have a don't know category, you might get wrong information, or you might miss information, or it's hard to predict what kind of information you actually get. The fifth one is a big problem on the researcher hand. If you ask questions with different wordings, then with basically the same content, then you may in many cases get very different answers. This is of course a bad thing about questionnaires. If you want to get some true opinions from people, then you must be very careful with the concept of leading them. It's very easy to construct questions which are phrased in such a way that you actually can get the answers you like. And the answers you like are perhaps not the answers you want here, are they? No. I would prefer to get the answers that corresponds with the preferences of the respondent here, not the answers which corresponds with the preferences of the researcher, so to speak. Of course, memory is important. If you ask people questions about events that may have taken place in previous time, then of course you may run into problems where people actually really don't remember the answer. In that case, they may find up an answer or try to remember wrong, and all that kind of possibilities for difficulties. The final category here, number 7, is the one which is the main point of the paper here, that the respondent lie. Okay. In some cases, it may be sensible for a respondent to lie. For instance, if I am to answer a questionnaire related to whether I feel my salary is high enough, if I'm slightly intelligent, I would not do that, would I? I would try to state some information that I really feel that my salary is far too low. In that case, I might have some possibilities of influencing my own salary. And this is perhaps the core of this talk. Of course, as it says at the bottom here, there are numerous other potential sources of error. So in general, I'm not much of a big fan of neither questionnaires nor research based on information from them. But that is perhaps a slightly different story. As you can see on the bottom here, this paper was actually published not so long ago, in 2012. We are now in 2014, in a journal called Sport Management Review. Okay, let's move on. A little bit on doping and lying. Here is a quote from the paper. The heading here says that asks the question, would humans answer sensitive questions truthfully? And of course, PED or performance-enhancing drug users are human beings. So this is perhaps a question that might be of interest. It says here in the introduction to the paper, the options for gathering information on unobservable behavioral choices, such as doping, are therefore limited to somehow asking those who hold this information, the athletes. Although it has long been acknowledged among users of survey methodology that respondents do not necessarily answer sensitive questions honestly and accurately, even under complete anonymity, and some authors have kind of phrased this, the majority of doping epidemiology to date relies on direct self-reports. What this says is that what we really know about how many people use drugs are based mainly on questionnaire answers. And of course, if those who use drugs, or even those who don't use drugs, tend, or there may be strict or interesting reasons for why they should actually lie, then we might put some questions on this kind of information. And that is, of course, the main point of this paper. Another paragraph from the paper. Intriguingly, the possibility of self-interest-driven positive false reporting, that is claiming a behavior that is in fact not in the repertoire of the person, has been overlooked, along with the potential effect of increased yes answers owing to random responding. Therefore, the aim of this paper is to explore the interplay between positive and negative false responding within a doping game framework. So we look at the framework where there is a doping setting, or actually there is a set of athletes who get some kind of questionnaire from some kind of researchers. and face the task of answering these questionnaires. The idea here is that there may be certain incentives for not telling the truth in these answers. Okay, now we will kind of launch a very simple game model which hopefully sheds some light on this problem. There are some dopers and non-dopers here. We put some names on them. We call this script D to represent the dopers, and this script Andy the non-dopers. Okay, and we say that the total number of athletes is script N. The number of dopers is script D. The number of clean athletes or non-dopers is script ND, as previously mentioned. And of course some obvious logic here that if you look at this intersection between the dopers and non-dopers, it should be an empty set, meaning that you don't have any, at least not in this definition, half dopers or quarter dopers. They're either dopers or non-dopers. Okay, so this is kind of a binary partition here. And of course, an effect of this is that the sum of these two groups then ends up with the total group. So there is nobody outside either the doping or the non-doping group. We also assume here that there are some dopers or some non-dopers, so there's not a situation where there are only dopers or only non-dopers. Of course, if the situation is such that either everybody takes drugs or nobody takes drugs, then doing questionnaires on these numbers are perhaps not that interesting. Point 2 here says that each athlete has 2 responses to the survey questions, indicating if they used drugs by these D or if they did not use drugs and D. Of course, in the case where we actually use a truthful or false or lying answer, this is kind of opposite in the sense that those who take drugs then will say that they don't take drugs, and those who don't take drugs will say that they take drugs if they lie. Okay, so we get a kind of opposite situation related to the content of the answer, depending on whether they answer truly or falsely. Some more assumptions here. Let's look at the payoff structure. Number 3 is not that important. Number 4 is of course always important in game theory. We assume here that the agents are rational in the sense that they want to optimize some kind of objective. In this case we look at a very special objective, the objective related to whether a doper is being caught in a doping test or whether a non-doper is able to influence the number of doping tests being performed. So we say here in point 5 that the best interest of the D group is that anti-doping work is minimized. Okay, if you're a doper, you would prefer as few doping tests as possible. This is, of course, exactly the opposite for the ND group, where the maximization of anti-doping work is the desirable outcome. If you are a non-doping athlete, competing with what you may believe are doping agents, we would of course like as many doping tests as possible to try to rule out the dopers. And finally, perhaps the most important point in point 6 here, athletes perceive a possible link between their responses and anti-doping. The idea is very simple. If some researchers do some kind of survey and get a very high number of dopers, then of course you would expect that more anti-doping work will be conducted. If you, on the other hand, get a very low response on the doping prevalence, then you would expect less doping tests. Of course, less doping tests is in the best interest of dopers, while many doping tests is in the best interest of non-dopers. They have actually opposite preferences here, these two groups. Now, given this setting, we can of course construct some kind of a game, okay? And if you look at the final point here, the game in extensive form with a pure unique Nash equilibrium. Here we have tried to kind of make a game out of this. So on the left hand side here we have a player which is denoted with script D, which means this is a guy who has taken drugs, and on the top here this is another guy who has not taken drugs. Of course we can interpret these either as 2 players or 2 groups of players. Okay. And as it says in the heading here, smiling should it be, and sad faces define payoffs. And it says the conclusion, perhaps, which is not so surprising, is that everybody lies in Nash equilibrium. Let's look at how we arrive at that conclusion. Okay, this doping individual or group, he can choose either to answer truly. In that case, he will express his answer as D, or falsely. In that case, he will express his answer as ND, claiming to be a non-doper. In that case, given that the non-doping agent here answers truly, he can choose true and get a sad face here. The reason, of course, is that by answering true here, he increases the amount of dopers in the research questionnaire. However, if he lies, he gets a big grinning smile here. In that case, he gets some more payoff because he is able to reduce the number of dopers, and hence, hopefully, by the previous argument, being able to reduce the number of dopers in the results. The same applies here. In this case, for the doper, the second best reply function, either he can answer truly. In that case, he gets a sad face because, again, he is not able to reduce the number of dopers. But the only way to do that, in that case, of course, when the non-doper answers falsely, he will choose this one instead of this one. So we have these arrows down here. The same applies, of course, for the non-doper. If the D person answers truly, of course, he can choose between true, get the sad face, or false, get the big grin, and he chooses false. Same down here, if the doper answers falsely, he can choose the sad face by answering truly, or a little bit more smiling face by falsely. You could perhaps note here that this grin is slightly smaller than this grin, indicating that this situation, which of course is the pure unique Nash equilibrium of this game, indicates slightly less benefits for each of the agents. So actually, the doper would prefer to be here. In this case, of course, there is in this game only non-dopers in this here and the same here. But here there is some dopers and some non-dopers. So the conclusion is quite simple here and straightforward. Everybody lies in Nash equilibrium. So to some surprise, it's actually beneficial not only for the dopers to reveal their true type, but also for the non-dopers. And of course the reason is straightforward, isn't it? If you're a non-doper and you answer that you don't use drugs, then of course the probability that the increase in doping tests should be there is decreasing. You would like as many doping tests as possible, and of course the only way in the sense you can affect that is by stating that you use drugs even if you don't use them. Okay. Some simple conclusions. Obviously, the game we look at here is not only simplified, it's really too simplified. So what would we really expect here? It says here that the researchers/regulators are also players. Now, if you think about this situation, the previous game, everybody lies, okay? The dopers lie, non-dopers lie. So if you get a doping prevalence based on your research of 95%, being a researcher, knowing this game, you would then infer that you know that the 95% dopers are actually non-dopers who are lying. So you would just turn the numbers around, wouldn't you? Instead of 95% dopers and 5% non-dopers, you would make the conclusion that there should be 5% dopers and 95% non-dopers, okay? So given that information, you must of course extend this game. And of course, if the athletes here are not stupid, and of course when we do game theory we don't assume they are stupid, they would expect this kind of researcher recalculation of the answers. So the question then would be, if I am an athlete and I understand that the researchers are trying to use this information to affect or to estimate the doping prevalence, then I might find myself in a difficult position. Of course, I face the question on how to react to this situation. We believe, at least we express that in the paper, that the only way of kind of coming out of this trap from the athlete's point of view is to randomize on your answers. We can't see any kind of non-randomized strategies here which would fool the researchers. So in a sense, the only tool you have as an athlete here is to kind of randomize on your answer completely at random. In that case, of course, the results are random as well, meaning that all kind of doping research based on this method is very hard to rely a lot on. Okay, but of course, when you do these kind of simple game theory, or at least maybe a little bit more than simple, then you assume a lot on how people react. It may actually be somebody who are not as strategic as this research imply, but on the other hand, there would still be grave possibilities for errors in interpreting the results. So what should we do about this? What to do? Surely that's hard to say, okay? How do we construct a questionnaire, or how do we interview people such that they do not lie? To some extent, economic theory has some answers here. There is a certain branch of economic theory, often referred to as mechanism design, which kind of focuses on how to make mechanisms, for instance, such that people don't lie. We refer to these mechanisms as truth-telling mechanisms. This is an interesting branch of research, and there is some simple examples on such mechanisms. For instance, an open English auction has these properties, given some assumption, of course. So could it be possible here to kind of make the questions, or actually the consequences of the answer, in such a way that it wouldn't help the athletes to lie? To some extent, we have kind of come to that conclusion, haven't we, by our extended game, where we look at, where we arrived at the conclusion of non-randomizing. Of randomizing. Unfortunately, that doesn't really help us. If you're interested in trying to find the doping prevalence, then it doesn't seem to help. So the concept of a truth-telling mechanism, or a truth-telling questionnaire, if you like, may be interesting to look at. Of course, we don't have any answers at the moment. This is tough stuff to work on. We have been kind of lazy here, haven't we? We haven't even bothered to formulate this bigger game as we just talked about previously. And of course, being lazy, delving into these matters are quite tough. So at the moment, we really don't have any answers here, apart from the fact that you should be very careful relying on questionnaire information related to doping. That is an important point, because in many cases we see research telling that certain prevalences are such and such, and it's different in cross-country skiing versus football and so on. And keeping in mind that this information may come from questionnaires should put some question marks in our eyes on whether to really believe this. Okay, that ends my talk as of today. Let's hope you liked it.